I really felt at that time that was the epicenter of all the music I really loved. The Troubadour, the Roxy, the Whiskey A Go-Go.
Yeah. There would be David Crosby and Joni Mitchell and Stephen Stills.
It was like a hit-making factory.
Yeah, they would just come in the studio with their guitar and play us a song, and then they would look at us, and then we would start assembling the body of the song for them.
And those were the songs that passed the old grey whistle test. And
that to me, this is worth today just to hear where that came from.
You and I would have come into the music industry at approximately the same time, wouldn't we, Lee? What was the first kind of gig that you remember doing?
The first real gig for me was James Taylor in 1970. I was in a band in Los Angeles called Wolfgang, and actually two of the members were English in the band. Bryn Howarth, Bryn is, still working all the time over here as an evangelical musician.
Yes.
And Bugs Pemberton was our drummer, who was with Jackie Lomax before he was in the Undertakers, I believe. And so we had this band in 68 and 69, and at one of our rehearsals, Bugs had a friend named John Fishbeck, and John Fishbeck owned Crystal Recording Studios in Hollywood, and he did all of the early Stevie Wonder records. And he brought a friend of his who had just come back from England, and it was James Taylor, to a rehearsal. And I met James, and when James got, his Apple album had tanked over here. But when he had done his James Taylor album, his first album, they got offered a gig at the Troubadour in Los Angeles, and he remembered me from a rehearsal. And my life changed instantly. And we went and did that, and it's never stopped.
Yeah.
I feel so blessed.
Two or three things about that, because Apple figures large, doesn't it? Jackie Lomax, George Harrison pulled Jackie Lomax under his wing, and there's a fantastic jam session that took place at George Harrison's house when he was playing Jackie, Sour Milk Sea, and Eric Clapton's in the room, and basically Jackie's almost overwhelmed by what was now being presented to him, because George had written Sour Milk Sea when he was in India with the Maharishi. But also, of course, as you say, James was signed to Apple and was in London for a while before going back to the States.
Yeah, and that's all Peter Asher.
Yes. And then the Troubadour was so important at that moment, wasn't it? For, obviously, Linda Ronstadt, for us, Elton John, and for this amazing performance by James Taylor.
It was really, that was the watering hole in Los Angeles, because it'd be Cat Stevens, Carly Simon, all those people. That was really where they got their launch in Los Angeles. And certainly when Elton hit there, it changed the music scene completely, and it was with, Nigel and Davey and Elton, and that trio was still a force of nature to be reckoned with. The thing that was interesting for me was that night when we played there with James, I hadn't recorded with James at this point. That album was already made, and Danny and Russ and Carole King played on that, and that was the band for the Troubadour. But that evening, Del Shannon was there with Brian Hyland, and they saw the show. And my actual first professional recording was with Brian Hyland, with Del Shannon producing him. And that was before I went in the studio with James. So that was and we did Gypsy Woman, it was one of those albums, and it's a self-titled album. But I look back and I go, holy crap.
Because Del Shannon was one of my very, very first musical heroes.
Yeah.
All those songs of his, Runaway. I can remember the sequence of the first few, Runaway, Hats Off to Larry, So Long Baby, Cry Myself to Sleep, Little Town Flirt, which I absolutely loved. I think that's my favorite of all of his.
Yeah.
Because Brian Hyland sealed with a kiss.
Yeah.
And but Del Shannon, I got to meet Del. He came into my TV show, The Old Grey Whistle Test, when he came over to work. I think it was with Dave Edmonds. It might have been Jeff Lynne, actually, in the mid-70s. And then, of course, he worked himself, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
With George, Jeff Lynne, the Walkaway album. Because he was going to be the replacement for Roy Orbison, wasn't he, in the Travelling Wilburys?
Yeah.
And then he had the heart attack, and it just
he had the end of his life wasn't good.
No.
He had a rough time. I remember being on a plane once, and sometimes you're just sitting relaxing on the plane, and then you start to hear something, you're going, what's going on? And I looked at the guy across the aisle, and he had his shoes off, and he was clipping his toenails. And I went, "Hi, Del."
No.
And it was Del Shannon. I looked at him, I said, "Really?" He said, "I don't care anymore." It's like, he was a piece of work.
Yeah.
But that was my real introduction to work. So I really kind of look at 1970 as, I had been playing up to then, but that was when I started to get recognition as a studio musician. So that was...
Because I arrived in Los Angeles in 74, and that sort of square mile, the Troubadour, the Roxy, the Whiskey A Go-Go, there's the Continental Hyatt House.
The Riot House.
The Riot House, the Rainbow Bar and Grill.
Yeah.
I mean, and then, of course, the Canyons just up behind.
Yeah.
And I really felt at that time that was the epicenter of all the music I really loved.
And it was. I mean, that was really kind of a golden period there, when you go to somebody's house and there would be David Crosby and Joni Mitchell and Stephen Stills and all these people. And the thing that was remarkable at that time was it was a community where, as time went on, things maybe got a little more petty, where people were more coveting their things. Back then, like, I remember being in the studio with James. I think we were either doing Gorilla or In the Pocket, whichever album had Mexico on it. And David and Graham swung by the studio, and James just goes, "You want to sing background?" And they immediately just went out and started, did the background vocals. So it was this community that was always like each guy was looking out for the other, and they were writing together and hanging out. And it was a remarkable time that hasn't been since. Things have just kind of dissipated a little bit because there's not the studio scene going on. There's more of, just working at home kind of stuff. So that community doesn't quite exist the same way. And now, as time goes on, we're losing so many of that ilk.
We are, aren't we? Yeah. I mean, that community still exists in Nashville.
Yeah.
I have to say, the infrastructure, the studio infrastructure, and the music publishing companies, all the infrastructure, the equipment hire places.
Yeah.
The labels, the studios, analog, digital, it still does all exist in Nashville. So a lot of, it's not just country, is it, Lee, in Nashville these days? But that moment in LA was such a special moment, wasn't it? And this sense of community. Yeah. I mean, when I arrived, I felt that in a really big way. It felt like the 60s hadn't ended yet.
Yeah.
We were still in the 60s. Home. Yes. Yeah. And the feeling of it, and you have to say things like the climate and all of that just lent itself to, and I was there with the Beach Boys recording material for the Beach Boys story, which we put out on the BBC. Yeah. So I was hanging out at their studio in Santa Monica. And but by this time, you'd already got, a hell of a number of albums under your belt. And this trio, you and Waddy and Russ, had now become established, hadn't it?
Yeah.
Just tell me how did all that blend together as people? How did you begin to work together in that way?
The thing that was remarkable and still is we've been playing together now 55 years as a team, and we've never had an argument. We've never had issues between each other. We really have been best friends since the very beginning. So there was never that kind of side issue where guys have, issues with each other. It's been great. And we all really came into it kind of with the same direction, same focus. And it's been just the greatest ride I could have ever dreamed of. And the thing that was fortunate at that time, I would think, was that we hooked up with James Taylor, because James really was the perfect catalyst for a new direction in music as the singer-songwriter. Because there were, you had Dylan and Tim Hardin and Peter, Paul and Mary and all those acts. The folk scene was different than what James brought to the table. And the two things I think that really was pivotal for us was that we were with James, and that Peter Asher was the first guy to put names on an album jacket. Because when you look at, the Wrecking Crew, and I've talked about this so many times, when people were listening to the Mamas and the Papas and the Association and all these acts, and Frank Sinatra and all, they never knew that it was the same musicians playing on everything. But when Peter put our names on the record and all of a sudden this singer-songwriter movement began, then the labels started hunting down singer-songwriters, and that's when you had Jackson Browne and you had all these people. They would look at James's album and they would see our names on it, and they went, well, if they're good enough for James, let's track those guys down.
Yeah.
And literally, when I did that Brian Hyland record, I had only been in a studio one time before that, and it was with our band one day to cut demo. We cut 9 songs as demos. That was my entire studio experience. And all of a sudden, I was one of the first call guys in LA, and I had no idea what we were supposed to do. We were all like, it was like guerrilla warfare in there. We were just trying to learn while we were earning.
Yes.
And it was but there was a vitality to that period that was palpable. You could feel it every day, every time you walked in the studio. And we saw each other, and then you started to build your community. Because when I started working in the studio, I was, at that point, still started working with the Wrecking Crew. So I did a lot of records with Hal Blaine, with Tommy Tedesco, with Al Casey, with Larry Knechtel and Mike Melvoin and Dennis Budimir. And so I was able to kind of feed off of the incredible history that those people had, which really was almost like mentoring for me.
And the energy.
Yeah.
Because you're in a hit singles, just a conveyor belt of absolutely great records.
Yeah. It was a factory, but a cool factory.
Yeah, yeah.
But it really had this whole process that everybody went through. So it was great. And I look back on that, and one of the things I still feel so blessed on in my life is I was of the age to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And that I can look back on it and reflect on it and just think of so many remarkable people I've had a chance to work with over the years. And
did you even sometimes lose track of all the hit records?
God, yes.
This is pre-James Taylor, but all the hit records you played on.
Yeah.
Because they must have just been coming at you almost 2 or 3 a day kind of thing.
It was really, and especially when you're a studio player, because then you're playing on everything.
Yeah.
So, one day you're working on Laughter in the Rain with Neil Sedaka.
Oh, I love that
And that's still
record.
one of my favorite records
same.
I ever worked on. And then, you'd be in with Linda Ronstadt or Carole King and doing the CSN, CS, CSNY, all that stuff. And then you suddenly become another thing that was part of my career was in 1967, I was in a band called Group Therapy, and we were produced by Mike Post. Now, when we went in the studio, we were too young and inexperienced to be on our record. So the Wrecking Crew played on it. And I sat in United Recorders in Hollywood looking through the window at Carol Kay and Hal Blaine and Tommy Tedesco and all them. And I thought to myself, I could never do this. This is like watching how they functioned in there. Yet 3 years later, I was working with them every day. But out of that, I knew Mike Post. And then when Mike Post started doing television, I did all of his TV shows because I came up as a classical pianist, so I could read. So all of a sudden, I was getting movie calls, and so the thing that opened up for me was incredibly wide, and.
Because Mike Post was the king of the TV.
He was the king. We did
themes,
Rockford Files and the A-Team and Hill Street Blues and Magnum P.I. and all those shows.
In fact, Hill Street Blues, the theme became almost as famous as the show itself, didn't it? Synonymous with the vibe of the show.
Yeah, and Greatest American Hero was a huge single for Mike and Joey Scarberry, who sang it. But there's all these different, it's got kind of look at the studio, it's almost like an onion, and you can just keep peeling layers away and other things appear. And I was fortunate enough to be able to access that onion.
Yeah.
And
because James wasn't part of the community out there, was he? Because
he was
at the time he was,
East Coast.
Once he was with Carly, and then they went to Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
And actually the two families were very integral, weren't they, to the kind of culture of Martha's Vineyard?
Yeah.
And I remember when I went out to spend some time with them there in 1977, they'd managed to achieve things like stopping McDonald's from developing on the island, because both of the families, but Carly's in particular, very powerful. Yeah. So coming out to the West Coast then for James, that for him must have been in itself kind of a liberating experience to just come out with you guys into the sunshine and enjoy the vibe.
Yeah, and well, he would stay like with Peter Asher. Peter Asher lived out there at that point, and so he would be there. And like we would just go over to Peter's house and we would rehearse songs there, and then we go right to the studio and cut them. I mean, it was this, it wasn't like this kind of cut and dry scene. It was so loose that every day, you just kind of, what do you want to do today? Let's work on this. And the thing that was great then too was there wasn't the pressure for time in the studio, which like when the Wrecking Crew worked, it was very defined. They would do like a 10-1, 2-5, 6, and those might be at different studios, but it was a very defined period. When we would do projects, we would be in there for 2 weeks. And sometimes you'd work for 4 hours a day and do stuff. Other days you would be in there for 20 hours in it. But we had time. I remember one of the songs James had, there was a background vocal part on it, and the lyric was "letting the time go by." And James sat there for a while, and he did it, and he sang it, and he went, it could be more interesting. And what he ended up doing was, we took what he had recorded, played it backwards. He wrote it out phonetically. Then he sang it with the tape backwards phonetically, and then they flipped the tape back. So instead of letting the time go by, he was going, letting the time go by.
Yes.
And he just went, I wanted something, and nowadays you wouldn't be able to do that because people really, unless it's a very specific project where they've blocked the studio out, most things you come in and they kind of want you in and out quick.
Yeah.
So there was magic.
But that was an amazing moment in time.
Yes.
Wasn't it? And everything seemed to have aligned. The production technology, the equipment was getting more sophisticated. The number of channels you could use was opening up.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say that some of that then became a bit indulgent, but
why not?
Why not? And it gave opportunities for people to really spend time in the studio, work on what they want to do, to experiment with this particular sound. It's all still analog. Yeah. So that intersection of great analog equipment, fabulous technology, time to express yourself, and support from the record labels.
Yes, that was
long-term support, which now that doesn't exist in the same way.
In those days too, the labels, you had Ahmet Ertegun and Jerry Wexler and all those guys whose passion was music. They knew the label was going to make money.
Yeah.
But they would support like the way they supported Bonnie Raitt.
Yeah.
Oh, how many albums before Nick of Time? Yeah. But they never gave up on her. And then when you finally get that hit, then the back catalog gets sold. But that doesn't, now it's like, get one shot, and if it doesn't happen, it's gone.
I mean, for me, the template label at that point was A&M, actually, because Jerry Moss and obviously Herb Alpert, they had long-term experience in the music industry. But as a musician, Herb would know what musicians needed in the way of support. Yeah. And they really did stick with an artist, didn't they? Yeah. Through 2 or 3 albums.
At least.
Because they felt to themselves, if this artist is good enough that we sign them in the first place, then we're not going to discard them. We're going to stick with them and see them through to realize their potential.
Yeah, and plus that studio lot, when you pulled in those gates, you were entering Wonderland.
Yes, you were.
Yeah. And the thing that was great in those days was, you could be at A&M or Record Plant, the ones that had multiple rooms, and the hang in the hallway. And you'd see somebody coming out of a room and you just go, oh, what are you doing here? And so, I remember doing a project at A&M. I was in A&M-B. Now we had just finished our session for the day and I came walking out into the hallway and Herbie Hancock came out of A and he goes, what are you doing now? I said, we just finished. He goes, want to work? And I just rolled my gear out and rolled into the next room and did a project with Herbie. It's just, that was that energy that was going on and those lots. There was such a wealth of camaraderie amongst all the musicians, and people would even if the sign on the door said, recording, stay out, everybody would walk in and you'd be sitting in the control room listening to people cutting, and Rod Stewart would be in there, whoever. And it was just delicious.
Yeah. So let's just go back, Lee, to the four of you and how you as a unit knitted together, and those first moments when presumably you all kind of realized and looked at one another and went, wow. I mean,
us?
Yes. Because, I mean, there's this great story, isn't there? You mentioned Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. There's a great story that Graham Nash tells of when he was going out with Joni, and David Crosby and Stephen Stills were around at Joni's, and Graham came back, and the guys in Joni's kitchen waited, and he was actually feeling a little bit jealous. Yeah. And this was 1968 sort of time. And they started jamming, and suddenly now the three of them sing. He joins in with David and Stephen as they're singing, and the three of them looked at one another and just went, wow.
It's that moment.
That moment, the voices, the way they blended.
Yeah.
Did you four have that similar kind of lightning strike moment?
The original was Danny Korchmar, Russ Kunkel, and myself.
Yeah.
We were the band, and Carole King was the piano player with us. The minute we played, it was there from the first beat. I mean, it was one of those things. There was no kind of setup to it. The minute we started playing with James, it was that, and then that translated into all the other projects. I mean, it's been the easiest thing playing together over these years. And then about 3 years after we started together, that's when Waddy came onto the scene. He'd moved out from New York, and Lou Adler put us all together with Waddy, and we were doing Carole King's Thoroughbred album.
Yes.
And so it was Cooch and Waddy and me and Russ, and then we became that unit. The section was never with Waddy. When Carole left, I mean, it was so funny when James encouraged Carole when we were doing the Troubadour and subsequent touring. Said, do some of your songs. And because people had looked at records and see Goffin and King, had no idea that King was like a 17-year-old girl working in the Brill Building.
Yes.
So she started doing like the Locomotion and stuff in the show, and the crowds were going crazy. And the next thing you know, Lou, put her on Ode Records, and she cut Tapestry. So you suddenly have a side person in your band who has the biggest record in the world. Yes. And we're going, I guess it's time to leave. And I was doing an album at A&M with Tom Jans and Mimi Farina at that point, and they had hired this keyboard player, Craig Durgee, for that. And as soon as I played with Craig, I called Peter, and I said, I think I found the replacement for Carole. And he came in, and that's how the section came together, was with him. But it was the easiest thing. It was like you opened your closet and you dug around and you pulled out these slippers and you put them on and you went, oh my God, that's feeling good. That's what it felt like when we played together. It was because I've worked with a lot of players that, like, when you see their road case in the studio, this is a famous world class, and it's a pain in the ass playing with them. There isn't that kind of connection that we had. So I really cherish the relationship that we've all had. And Russ and I are still out here with Lyle touring. I mean, I've been looking across next to me on stage for 55 years at this guy. And we never tire.
You came into Radio 2 with Lyle a few years ago. I was so excited to see you both. And it is an amazing thing. I was just thinking the whole thing around Carole King, and because the Brill Building actually was also the inspiration for the title of the TV show that I did in the 70s, because the old Greys were the people, weren't they, around the building?
Yeah.
It would be the receptionist or the guy who was operating the lift or whatever. Yeah. And so you'd have Carole King, Jerry Goffin, Neil Sedaka, because he wrote Oh Carol. And, I know that Carole was so young in those days. Yeah. But it was like a hit-making factory. Yeah. And they'd take the most likely songs down to the room at the end of the week. maybe 15 or 20. It was all about the hook, wasn't it? And they'd pull in the old greys and they'd play them, the songs. And the ones that they could hum or whistle, having just heard them once or maybe twice, were the ones most likely to become hit records. And those were the songs that passed the old grey whistle test. And
that to me, this is worth today just to hear where that came from. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and it was it's a recognized phrase within the Brill Building.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great, that passed the old grey whistle test.
Yeah.
So that's how come we adopted it for the title of the show.
That is so wonderful. I had no idea where that came from. You kind of go, that's an interesting phrase. I wonder where that came from. It's like
So how did the 80s treat you then, Lee? Because, a lot of people that came up through the 70s then said, the 80s became much more difficult when lots of different types of technology came in.
Yeah.
Playing actually became kind of less appreciated, I suppose, because you could do so much on computer keyboards.
Yeah, I mean, that was the advent of the DX7 and all that stuff coming in and digital technology. The thing where myself and Russ and the other guys really were different from a lot of the players in town was we still went on the road. So when things slowed down in the studio, we were out touring. Which really, because guys I knew in the 70s who always say, how can you go on the road? You're going to lose your seat in the studio. In the 80s, they were calling, going, if you hear of any road gigs, it had really flipped over at that point. So we were always there. But I think playing as a studio player in so many genres, where some were heavily affected by technology, where the drummers weren't getting hired or they were programming at that point and they were playing Linn drums and all that.
Yes.
But other areas of music weren't going there. So if you were diversified and you could kind of tap into all of that, you could still be working. My work didn't get tremendously challenged in any of the decades. It's always been there. But again, I've always toured, so that I wasn't really depending on the studio for both my financial and personal satisfaction. And I think if somebody put a gun to my head and said, you have to choose studio or touring, I would take touring.
Would you?
Yeah.
Because you have a lot of resilience, don't you? Because it pounds at you.
Yeah.
But clearly you've thrived. I mean, you look so well now, Lee.
Yeah.
I mean, you look fantastic.
Well,
And I've done my share of touring over the years, and I did a big tour last year, songs the Beatles gave away with a friend of mine, Colin Hall. And I love the experience of being on stage. I always do. But the traveling eventually began to wear
That's the
out
horrible
me.
part.
Are you good with that? Are you okay with that?
I've resolved that's what I have to do. I mean, like,
So what do you suspend?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the greatest things that ever happened was getting internet on the bus. Because instead of just sitting there, or bringing a suitcase of Betamaxes to wonder what you're going to see, and then the machine doesn't work, I can get in the bunk and turn on Netflix or taking care of stuff, but you're still laying in this coffin on the bus. It's really hard, but to me, when you walk out on stage and you look at the audience and that boom, that connection happens. And one of the other things I absolutely love about playing live is when I pluck a note, the note's over. It's on to the next note. In the studio, you pluck that note and they're going, well, let's maybe move it. Let's fine tune it. And you're going, it's a fucking note. I just played a note. Give me a break. But live, man, the minute you play, it's gone at that point. So you're always in a forward motion playing live, where in the studio you can get stagnant just through the technology, because a lot of guys, because the technology's there, they feel they have to use it, even if they don't need it.
Yeah.
And you can be sitting there going, we're losing all of our energy, wasting time on like this little process you're trying to pull together. So I think but it's kind of like if I was going to be like an F1 car, I would like to drive rather than be in the pit crew, but being in the pit crew is great too. So, I would never negate, the studio work by any means, because I really love it. But there's something about playing live to me that still is exhilarating. And it doesn't matter, like when we were out with Phil Collins playing 80,000 seaters a night in stadiums, or if I was up in Penrith in a little pub with Judith Owen, playing for 30 people. I feel exactly the same because I'm connecting with the people I can see.
Yeah,
I love it.
Just an aside, I know I'm digressing by saying this, but when we're talking about the studio and technology and everything else, and the way things had grown in the 70s, I mean, so I'd been down in Nassau and I was flying up to New York to do interviews. This was for the Old Grey Whistle test, and the Bee Gees were working on Spirits Having Flown. And they invited me to stop off in Miami to go into Criteria Sound to listen to playback of one or two of the tracks from the new album. I mean, they were so big at that moment. It was so exciting, the idea of going in to see them. But they'd matched up two 64-track desks to get 128 tracks. And the two desks just kept going slightly out of sync with one another. I mean, it led to one of my greatest moments, I have to say, in terms of experience, because they were just going to play me tracks that they rough mixes. But because everything was sort of out of sync, they only had kind of the backtrack of two or three of the tracks. So they took me into a little side room in the studio, sat me down, and they played Tragedy and Spirits Having Flown itself, Too Much Heaven, I think it was. And so there's the backtrack coming out of the speaker, and I had the three of them singing live over my shoulder to the backtracks. I mean, I'm getting chills even now just thinking about it. It was one of the most incredible experiences ever, because those sibling harmonies, you just can't beat them, can you? Sibling harmonies.
Yeah. No, they breathe as one.
Unless you're Crosby, Stills and Nash, of course. Yeah.
But that's fantastic that you to experience that.
But one of the things, Lee, obviously, as you and Russ and all of you, in a sense, you're surrendering yourself, aren't you, to that moment. You're not the guy grabbing that microphone and facing that spotlight. You're there providing the backing and the vibe and the feeling to the music that person in the spotlight is making. So that's quite a thing, isn't it? To surrender to that and provide the warmth and the brilliance that you've provided over the last 55
I think none of us, this is one of the things that's beautifully addressed in Denny Tedesco's documentary about us, The Immediate Family, because we talk about that, and the artists that we've worked with talk about what the band meant to their music. Most of us really didn't have aspirations of being that person in the front. We really loved that community at the back of the stage where we all got to work together and create the bed that everything kind of was built on. Now, on the one hand, they're reaping sort of the major benefits of the whole thing, but I don't really want those benefits for the most part. We really loved what we got to do. And it was also fascinating for us, like when James or Jackson or anyone would come in, they would just come in the studio with their guitar and play us a song, and then they would look at us, and then we would start assembling the body of the song for them. And there were times where we'd sit there and we'd go, could use a better intro. Could use maybe a bridge on this. And we would work with them and create these things, even though we weren't credited for it. But we all wanted the end product to be the best it could possibly be. And most of those artists really recognized. James would talk at times going, he said, I just feel like the singer in a band up here, even though his name's on the marquee and his picture's on the album. But he said, I don't know what my music would be like if it wasn't for what these guys created for me. And it's an interesting place to sit, but I've always loved it. And I also love, when you're working with the artists, they're living and dying by that album that you've just made. When I finish my bass parts, I'm off doing another album for somebody. And when I finish that, I'm off doing something for somebody else. So I'm constantly moving through the music stuff where now they have to go on the road with that. They have to promote it. That becomes their thing, where we really didn't have to deal with any of that. We could go off and do lots of other work. So everything felt fresh every day. You were not kind of stagnant with one project. And to me, that's the thing that's made me, after 55 years of doing this, that I still love it every day because it's fresh.
And across many different styles. Because that artist, let's face it, that artist is that artist, and they're doing what they do, whereas you could be working tomorrow on a country record.
Russ and I were just down in Nashville. We're at Blackbird working with Reba on a new album.
Were you?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lovely studio.
Oh, it's a beautiful room.
Martina McBride, John, obviously
their
McBride.
place,
it's a vibe, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dave Stewart works there from time to time as well, doesn't he?
No, it's a lovely room. And the thing that was really kind of fun was there, Dan Huff was playing guitar on it, and Steve Nathan playing keyboards, and it was a great band that they put together. And I was sitting with Dan Huff before, because I had known Dan before Giant or any of that stuff. When he used to live in LA, we did a lot of sessions. And his father, Ron Huff, was a great arranger, and I'd done projects with him. But we were talking beforehand about what it's like nowadays sitting at home and people send you files and you do your part and you can't affect anything but your part. And when we had this long talk and we're all agreeing, it's like, preaching to the choir amongst ourselves. When we went in the studio, the first song we were cutting with Reba, we cut a really great version, and Reba said, I kind of really don't feel this one so much as a ballad. Could we try doing it up tempo? And we did it, and bam, it locked in. You could never do that when you're sitting at home by yourself. The fact that the whole band was in the studio and we could make a complete shift right on the spot, and it made the song work for the artist.
And that you've got the experience under your belt to be able to be that flexible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, Lee, the way that in certain situations, how many pennies have to fall into slots to make things be what they are.
Yeah.
And I always think with the Beatles, let's say, for them to have become the band that they were and the popularity and the huge level that they reached, there were so many factors that had to just gel.
Yeah.
And one of the most important to me was George Martin.
Yeah.
That he was a great, great producer anyway, but it was so much to do with the experiences that he'd had with creating soundscapes prior to his meeting with the Beatles, because he'd worked with the Goons, Peter Sellers. He'd done albums that required sound effects and different styles of music. He'd worked in jazz, so that when it came to the Beatles, when John Lennon in particular was saying to him, on I Am the Walrus, wouldn't it be great to have a radio tuning in at the end of it? And George would go, well, John, I think I might be able to get something up on a fader for you. Let's see, and plug up a radio and tune the dial and have it on a fader.
Yeah.
He could do all that stuff because he'd experienced it through the years.
Yeah.
And you as a unit, having played on so many different types of records with so many different artists, with all their temperaments as well. Because, I mean, you've got to factor that in also, Lee, haven't you? That you're, I should imagine that there were certain times, because I know how calm and lovely you are, that at times that would have been an important ingredient in the mix as well, that you could be calm, just talking to people and, and calming the atmosphere. I could imagine that that's a very important aspect.
It is. And you have to be malleable.
Yes.
In the studio. Because,
in a good way.
In a good way. I mean, especially for me, because every day I'm working with different drummers. I might have Russ Kunkel one day, and I might have John Robinson the next day, and I might have Vinnie Colaiuta the next day. And each of these guys has their own thing. So we all kind of suss each other out really quickly, and so where one day you're leaning on the next day you're kind of kicking back on it, depending on the music. So there's so many considerations. One of the things that I love so much, I've done a lot of projects at Air Lyndhurst, was sitting in the canteen with George, because he was there so much of the time, and he'd just come out and sit and he'd just be talking to him, and he's just going, because I think American Flyer, I think I did an album with a group, and he produced it.
Wow, yes.
And but you sit there kind of pinching yourself, going, "It's George Martin," I mean, you're freaking out.
Yes.
But was the most delightful man. But it's funny how these circles come around. A 2 years ago or something, we did a video thing, and I got to play with Ringo on it. And I was an usher at the Hollywood Bowl when the Beatles played there. And I'm just sitting there, kind of, my mind is melting, going, I was an usher at the Bowl, and now he's 10 feet away from me and we're looking at each other and playing. I go, how does this happen? I still question my whole career all the time. Just people I meet, like if I'm at some function and Robert Plant's there or Clapton, and they go, "Hey Lee, how are you doing?" I go, "How do they know me?"
Yes,
because as a sideman, you're always so far back in it, you don't really realize that people actually acknowledge you're there, because you watch the award shows and stuff. We're not the guys that are getting awards or going up there. So you kind of wonder when they recognize you exist. It's like, it's an interesting life.
But that interface between you and that new drummer that you've just sat down with, that must be, that moment of just checking
It's a dance.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's a dance. I did an album with a band back in the 90s called Barefoot Servants. Mm-hmm. And it's probably one of my favorite things I've ever worked on. I love these guys so much. And Ray Brinker was the drummer on this. Who's really they said we're going to rehearse for a couple of days and we're going to go in and cut the whole thing live. Michael Frondelli at Capitol was producing it. And we sat down and started the first song, and by 4 bars into it, I looked at Ray and I said, "I want to have your baby." I mean, it was one of those things we locked so instantly on it. And for the most part, it usually works. There's an occasion where you get in and it's just not happening with somebody.
And what happens then?
You do your best to get through it, and you hope you never have to do it again with them. Even like with artists. I mean, if somebody calls me and they say, "Oh, like my brother-in-law wants to make a record, here's some money. Don't worry about it. It's nothing." I'll go in that studio with them and I'll give them the same attention I give Phil Collins.
Of course.
Because at the end of the day, I always look at it and I go, when the phone rings, you have 2 options. You can say yes or you can say no. And if you say yes, it comes with obligation to give your best when you go in there, regardless if it's like a real high-end project or if it's just something simple for somebody that just wants to do a little something. You want to take personal pride in what you do and give it your very best. And there's times where I've worked on projects where I go, in the back of my mind, not verbally, but I'm going, this is the worst piece of crap I've ever played on, and it ends up being a huge hit.
Yes.
And other things where you walked out of the studio going, this is the coolest thing I ever played, and it doesn't even get released. There's a change of regime at the label, and the new people don't want any of the old artists that the previous person had, so they just shelve all of that, and you're going...
So much of that sometimes.
Yeah, there's some great music that's still sitting in a warehouse somewhere that never got mixed or released.
But I mean, I can say this because I'm a step removed, as it were, but I feel that that's one of the things that's given you this massive longevity and respect that you have, Lee, that I have to be honest, I'm the same. If I'm doing a gig, doesn't matter where it is, what it is, I want to give 100% to that moment. Otherwise, why am I there?
Yeah.
So let's just walk in that room and give it everything. This is my feeling. But the other thing about touring is that I remember talking to one of my favorite musicians years ago, Neil Casale, who passed away. I love Neil's music, around the year 2000, Anytime Tomorrow, I think, was the album that I love so much. And Neil was he was a troubadour, just constantly on the road. And he said to me that he'd bought a little apartment in Los Angeles. He'd bought this apartment, had kind of semi-moved in, and then went back on the road. And he didn't manage to get actually back to the apartment for many months, during which time he'd forgotten the address. He'd forgotten where it was. It took him ages to kind of just find the apartment again because his mind had been swept away on the tours that he was doing and everything else.
Yeah.
So as a bass in your life, Lee, being taken away onto the road for many, many months of every year, how have you lived like that through your life?
It's hard to think of because it's never been an issue for me. Like I come home, there's times where you feel kind of like a 6th finger on a hand when you get back into your household. and your wife, your family,
Yes.
they've kind of got their own routine going now, and you're in the way, like they're trying to do something, move, get out of the way. But you fall back. It's funny when I've had people say to me, you come off a big tour like that. How do you get back in it? And I post a picture of me cleaning up dog poop in the backyard. Yeah, and I go, it's really easy. The dogs don't care about it.
No.
They're just so. But I think that I really enjoy like each aspect of it. Like I love gardening, so I'm so excited when I get home because I can get back in the garden and work. I love driving. And on the road, you don't drive, you're driven. So I get to go home, get in my truck, and hopefully my wife started it a few times so the battery's not dead. But in terms of like not being able to find where I live or anything, there's times like when I get home, though, like,
I mean, that is a bit extreme.
But I'll get to the house, off of a tour, and I'll open the door and the alarm's going off, and I'm going, what was the code?
Yes.
Like you haven't punched the code for 3 months or 5 months. And so you can catch yourself at that point. But it's always been a pretty easy transition. And then it's difficult then when you're getting ready to go on the road. But once you're home for a while, then cabin fever starts to set in. You can't wait to hit the road again. So you've got both these things are always pulling at you, and you want them both. But maybe I'm a Gemini, and maybe that's the duality of being that.
Because even like now, having just come off C2C, the country to country weekend at the O2, so exciting, quite, such a buzz. And, I find I have to slow glide back down again. Yeah. You can't just do that, can you?
No, it doesn't turn off. It's like finishing a session in the evening or finishing a concert. And then people say, so you going to bed now? Are you kidding? You're going to be laying there till 4 or 5 in the morning, like watching TV and doing stuff just to kind of decompress after it, because there's an energy that you build up in a show that you don't just shut that off.
Yeah. Because, you have to know how to kind of manage yourself, don't you?
Yeah.
And make sure you're healthy.
Yeah.
And that's something that you and I, in our later years, are extremely fortunate to still possess. Got our marbles. Yeah. We're reasonably healthy. Yeah. Physically, we're still getting about well.
Yeah.
It's daft to even, I never even thought I'd be talking about any of this stuff. Yeah. But here we still are, Lee.
Yeah. Well, the music business has always been kind of a flavor of the month business. So it always kind of surprised me when I'd be still working in my 40s and still working in my 50s, still working in my 60s, still working in my 70s, and we're approaching 80 now, kind of thing. And you go, but I'm going to say, fine, let's keep going. I'd like to be an old relic on stage up there and just lay down and pass out.
Old relic behind the microphone. So one final question, then. Ambition. Yeah. Because you've achieved so much. What is there still that you'd like to do?
I so enjoy what I do that I don't care about. There's no aspiration beyond it because it's still a project going. We're booked up. I've got my book is pretty full into September this year, and so I'm content with that. I'll get enough time at home where I can do some plaster and painting work that needs to be done in the house.
Bit of gardening.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's nothing. There used to be when I thought about things like I had a hot rod for many, many years. And I always thought at some point I'm not going to be working. I can really be out cruising and having fun. And then the last time I went out to start it up, the fuel lines had rotted out and gas was pouring out of it. So I sold it. Yes. And I'd had it for 40 years, but I thought by this time in my life, things would have wound down. And they haven't. I'm actually busier practically than I've ever been because during COVID, I took on other projects because all the work was gone. So I started a YouTube channel, I did a book and all this stuff. Well, now that everything's busy again, I don't want to give up the things that I was doing during COVID. So I've doubled my workload. So I'm busy kind of around the clock, but I love it.
I love your book.
Yeah.
I love your outspoken political statements, which, get you into trouble.
I get death threats. I get death threats on my Facebook.
Get cancelled by Instagram regularly and all that kind of stuff.
I must be doing something right.
Exactly. Oh, Lee,
it is a joy to see you.
And you too. Really, absolutely.
One of the giants of this industry, and I appreciate everything you've created over all these years. It's
Absolutely,
really
same.